The house was eerily quiet that late afternoon. In the modest kitchen of a suburban neighborhood in Atlanta, Georgia, 4-year-old Ethan sat cross-legged on the chilly tile floor. His small frame was pressed tightly against the cabinets as if they could shield him from the world. The dim light of the setting sun cast long shadows across the room, making it feel even emptier. In his small hands, Ethan clutched his mother's cell phone with a grip so tight his knuckles were white. His tiny fingers trembled as he carefully dialed a number he had practiced only in emergencies. 911. The distant sound of heavy footsteps echoed from down the hallway, where his father's restless pacing sent a steady creak through the floorboards. Behind Ethan, in the adjacent living room, his mother lay motionless on the carpet, her chest barely rising and falling in shallow breaths. The phone rang once, twice, and then a warm, reassuring voice broke through the oppressive silence. 911, what's your emergency? Ethan swallowed hard, his voice emerging as a shaky whisper. I'd like to order a Happy Meal. The operator on the other end, Officer Jennifer Davis, blinked in surprise, her fingers hesitating over her keyboard. The request was odd, but the boy's trembling tone struck a chord in her instincts. She softened her voice further. Hi there, sweetie. My name's Officer Jenny. Can you tell me more about your Happy Meal? What kind of toy would you like with it? Ethan's large brown eyes flickered nervously toward the hallway, as another heavy footstep sounded closer. His small body tensed, and he clutched the phone tighter. Chicken nuggets, he whispered, his words shaky but deliberate. And please hurry. Officer Jenny's heart skipped a beat as the coded message clicked into place. The boy wasn't playing games. She quickly scanned the caller ID, her trained eyes locking on the address. With calm urgency, she typed furiously, signaling to dispatch while keeping her tone light to avoid scaring the boy. That sounds delicious. I'll make sure to add extra sauce. Is your dad nearby? She asked carefully, piecing together the fragmented puzzle of the situation. Ethan's voice dropped even lower, barely audible. He's in his room, but Mommy's not waking up. Jenny's stomach turned at the quiet desperation in his tone, but her voice remained steady. Okay, sweetie, you're doing great. Stay with me, okay? Help is already on the way. Ethan nodded slightly, though he knew she couldn't see him. His lips trembled as he whispered, "Thank you," before pressing the red button to end the call. The phone slipped from his hand and clattered onto the floor, just as a dark shadow filled the kitchen doorway. Ethan looked up, his small frame shrinking against the cabinet as his father stepped into the room, his expression twisted with suspicion and anger. Ethan's father, Anthony, loomed in the doorway, his large frame blocking out the fading light from the hallway. His disheveled appearance, unkempt hair, rumpled clothes, and bloodshot eyes betrayed the hours he'd spent pacing and muttering to himself. The sharp scent of whiskey lingered in the air around him, its acrid bite stinging Ethan's nose. "What are you doing with that phone, boy?" Anthony demanded, his voice a low growl that sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. The little boy instinctively kicked the phone away, hoping his father wouldn't notice. "Nothing, Daddy," Ethan stammered, his small voice barely audible over the pounding of his heart. Anthony's eyes narrowed, scanning the room for any sign of deceit. His gaze flickered toward the living room where Ethan's mother, Sophia, lay still on the carpet. Her bruised temple was visible even in the dim light, the purplish mark a stark contrast to her normally glowing complexion. Anthony's lips pressed into a thin line as he glanced back at Ethan. "You better not have done something stupid," he muttered, stumbling toward the kitchen table and dropping heavily into a chair. He ran a hand over his face, muttering about bills, work, and how nobody respects me in my own damn house. Ethan stayed silent, his small hands clenched into fists on his lap. He didn't dare move or speak. He remembered what his mom had told him. "Stay quiet when Daddy's angry. Don't make sudden movements." A faint sound reached Ethan's ears, so faint he thought he might be imagining it. But as he strained to listen, the sound grew clearer. Sirens, faint but steadily approaching, their urgent wail cutting through the still evening air. Anthony froze, his head snapping toward the window. His eyes darkened with suspicion as the sirens grew louder, their pitch rising until they were right outside the house. A heavy knock rattled the front door, making both Ethan and his father jump. "Open up! This is the police!" A commanding voice called from outside. Anthony shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He looked at Ethan, his face twisting into a mask of fury. "What did you do?" he snarled, taking a step toward the boy. Ethan scrambled backward, pressing himself tighter against the cabinet. "I didn't do anything," he cried, tears spilling down his cheeks. Another knock, louder this time. "We have a warrant to enter. Open the door or we're coming in." Anthony's anger faltered for a moment, replaced by panic. He turned toward the front door, his movements unsteady. But before he could take another step, the door burst open with a deafening crack, and 3 uniformed officers flooded into the house, weapons drawn. "Get down on the ground! Hands where we can see them!" Officer Samuel Reed barked, his voice firm and unyielding. Anthony spun around, his drunken mind struggling to process the situation. "This is my house," he shouted, his fists clenching. "You have no right—" Before he could finish, 2 officers moved swiftly, forcing him to the ground. His protests turned into a stream of incoherent curses as they secured him in handcuffs. Officer Reed kept his weapon trained on Anthony until the situation was fully under control. Meanwhile, Officer Jenny entered the house, her gaze sweeping the room until it landed on Ethan. The boy was frozen in place, tears streaming silently down his cheeks. Jenny crouched down, her voice soft and reassuring. "Hey there, sweetheart. You're safe now," she said gently, holding out her hand. "Come with me, okay?" Ethan hesitated for a moment before nodding. He reached out and grasped her hand, his small fingers clinging tightly to hers. She guided him out of the kitchen, shielding him from the sight of his father being dragged toward the waiting patrol car. As Officer Reed followed Jenny and Ethan into the living room, he spotted Sophia lying on the floor. Her shallow breathing was labored and her face was pale. He immediately called for the paramedics to move in, his tone urgent but calm. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" one paramedic asked as they knelt beside Sophia, checking her vitals. She stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering open, but her gaze remained unfocused. Ethan watched the scene unfold, his small body trembling. "Is Mommy going to be okay?" he whispered, clutching Officer Jenny's arm. "She's in good hands, Ethan," Jenny assured him, her voice soothing. "The paramedics are going to take care of her." The paramedics worked quickly, stabilizing Sophia's condition and preparing her for transport. As they lifted her onto the stretcher, her eyes briefly focused on Ethan. She raised a weak hand toward him, her lips moving soundlessly. "Mommy!" Ethan cried, trying to run to her, but Jenny held him back gently. "You'll see her soon," Jenny promised, crouching down to meet his tear-filled gaze. "She's going to the hospital where they'll help her feel better. You've been so brave, Ethan." The boy nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. He watched as the paramedics wheeled his mother out of the house, their movements efficient but careful. The wail of sirens faded into the distance as the ambulance carrying Sophia sped away. The house, once filled with tension and chaos, now seemed eerily quiet. Officer Jenny knelt beside Ethan in the living room, her steady presence a small comfort to the frightened boy. "Let's get you somewhere safe, okay?" Jenny said softly. "We're going to take care of you." Ethan nodded, his wide eyes glancing back at the door as though expecting his mother to return. His small hands clutched the hem of his shirt nervously. Officer Samuel Reed entered the room, his authoritative demeanor softening as he saw Ethan's tear-streaked face. "Is there anyone we can call for you, Ethan?" "Maybe a relative or a neighbor." Ethan shook his head. "It's just me and Mommy," he murmured. "And Daddy, but—" His voice trailed off as his eyes flickered toward the kitchen, where his father had been moments earlier. Reed crouched down to Ethan's level, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Your mom's going to be okay, and we're going to make sure you're safe. How about you come with me for a little while?" Jenny gave Reed a nod of agreement. I'll get his things, she offered, moving toward a small backpack sitting near the couch. Inside, she found a few toys, a change of clothes, and a worn stuffed bear that looked like it had been hugged 1,000 times. She handed the bear to Ethan, who hugged it tightly to his chest. Reed led Ethan out to the patrol car, opening the back door for him. "You can sit right here, buddy," he said with a kind smile, "and you get to keep Mr. Bear close." Ethan climbed into the car, clutching the stuffed animal as though it were a lifeline. He stared out the window, his small face pressed against the cool glass, as the car pulled away from the house that no longer felt like home. The precinct was bustling with activity when Officer Reed and Ethan arrived. Phones rang incessantly, officers chatted in low voices, and the occasional clatter of a printer punctuated the air. Despite the noise, the space felt safe compared to the tension Ethan had left behind. Reed led Ethan to a quiet room filled with bright posters and shelves of toys. A small table sat in the center, covered with coloring books and crayons. "This is our special room for kids," Reed explained. "You can color or play here while we figure things out." Ethan hesitated at the doorway, his grip on Mr. Bear tightening. "Will Mommy come here?" he asked, his voice small. Reed knelt down, his expression kind but serious. "Not yet, buddy. Your mom needs to rest at the hospital, but we'll take good care of you until she's ready, okay?" Ethan nodded reluctantly, taking a seat at the table. He picked up a crayon and began coloring, his strokes hesitant at first but growing more confident as he focused on the activity. Reed stayed close, watching him with quiet concern. Through the one-way glass, Detective Maria Lopez observed the scene, her sharp eyes noting every detail. She glanced at Reed as he entered the observation room. "The kid's been through hell," Reed said, his voice low. "We'll need to coordinate with child services, but I want to be sure he's not handed off to the system if there's a better option." Lopez raised an eyebrow. "Are you thinking about stepping in?" Reed hesitated, his gaze drifting back to Ethan. "I don't know yet, but someone needs to. He's got no one else." The next morning, sunlight streamed through the blinds of Sophia's hospital room, casting faint lines across the sterile white sheets. Her eyes fluttered open, adjusting slowly to the bright light. A dull ache pulsed through her head, and her body felt heavy, but she was conscious and alive. A soft knock at the door broke the silence. A nurse peeked inside with a warm smile. "Good morning, Ms. Carter. I'm glad to see you awake. You're at Atlanta Memorial. You were brought here last night." Sophia's dry throat made it difficult to speak. She managed a raspy, "Where's Ethan?" "My son. Where is he?" The nurse stepped closer, placing a reassuring hand on Sophia's arm. "Ethan is safe. He's with Officer Reed, the officer who brought you in. He wanted to make sure Ethan wasn't left alone while you recover." Sophia's shoulders relaxed slightly, though worry still lingered in her eyes. "Can I see him?" "I'll call and let them know you're awake, but first the doctor needs to check on you. We'll bring Ethan here soon." Back at the precinct, Ethan was seated in Officer Reed's office, a small plate of pancakes in front of him. Though the syrup dripped enticingly down the stack, Ethan only picked at his food, glancing occasionally at the door. "Not hungry?" Reed asked, sitting across from him. "I want to see Mommy," Ethan said quietly, poking at a piece of pancake with his fork. Reed nodded. "I talked to the nurse earlier. Your mom's awake now, and the doctors say she's going to be okay. We'll go visit her soon." Ethan's face lit up briefly, a flicker of hope cutting through his exhaustion. "Really?" "Really," Reed confirmed, ruffling the boy's hair. "Finish up those pancakes and we'll head over." At the hospital, Ethan clung to Reed's hand as they made their way down the hallway to Sophia's room. His steps were small and hesitant, but the moment they reached the door, he broke into a run. "Mommy!" Ethan cried, rushing to the bed. Sophia's face lit up despite the bruises marring her features. She opened her arms and Ethan climbed up onto the bed, nestling against her. Tears welled up in her eyes as she held him close, her fingers brushing through his curly hair. "You're so brave, my sweet boy," Sophia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you." Officer Reed lingered near the doorway, giving them a moment. When Sophia looked up, their eyes met, and she offered a grateful smile. "Thank you," she said softly, "for taking care of him." Reed nodded. "He's a strong kid, just like his mom." As the day progressed, Reed and Sophia spoke quietly while Ethan napped in a chair beside the bed, clutching his stuffed bear. Reed explained the steps moving forward: legal proceedings against Anthony, protective measures for Sophia, and support resources for her and Ethan. Sophia's expression grew serious. "I don't want him near my son again. Ever." Reed's jaw tightened. "We'll do everything in our power to make sure he doesn't come back into your lives." Sophia hesitated, her gaze dropping to her son. "It's been hard. Ethan's all I have. But with everything that's happened, I don't know if I'm strong enough to do this on my own." Reed leaned forward, his voice firm yet kind. "You don't have to do it alone. There are people who want to help. And if you ever need anything at all, you call me." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "Why would you care so much about a stranger?" Reed looked at Ethan, then back at Sophia. "Because no child should ever feel unsafe in their own home, and no mother should have to go through this alone." The days that followed marked the beginning of a cautious recovery for Sophia and Ethan. While Sophia remained in the hospital for observation, Officer Reed continued to be a steady presence in their lives. Each morning, he brought Ethan to visit her, staying just long enough to ensure they had what they needed before stepping aside to give them privacy. Ethan, who had clung tightly to Reed's hand on that first hospital visit, began to open up more. He brought drawings for his mother, carefully colored pictures of superheroes, rainbows and smiling faces that brightened the stark walls of her room. "Look, Mommy," Ethan said one day, holding up a drawing of their family. "It's me, you and Mr. Bear." Sophia smiled, brushing a tear from her cheek. "It's beautiful, baby. We'll keep it forever." Officer Reed leaned against the doorway, a cup of coffee in hand, watching the tender moment. It was a sight that reinforced his determination to help them rebuild their lives. The legal proceedings against Anthony were swift, thanks to the overwhelming evidence of abuse and neglect. Officer Reed testified on behalf of Sophia and Ethan, recounting the events of that fateful night with calm professionalism. Sophia, though nervous, stood tall as she provided her own testimony. The judge's ruling was clear. Anthony was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, and a restraining order was placed to ensure he could never come near Sophia or Ethan again. When the gavel struck, marking the end of the trial, Sophia exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Reed placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "It's over now. You're free." Tears welled in her eyes as she looked up at him. "Thank you for everything." Sophia and Ethan moved into a small but cozy apartment provided through a local domestic violence survivor program. The space, though modest, was theirs, a sanctuary free from fear and filled with the promise of a brighter future. Reed visited often, bringing groceries, books for Ethan, or just a listening ear for Sophia. Over time, their bond deepened. Reed became more than a protector. He became a trusted friend and a constant source of support. Ethan, now more confident and outgoing, began attending a new school where he quickly made friends. He still carried Mr. Bear in his backpack every day, a symbol of comfort and resilience. One evening, as Reed helped Sophia hang curtains in the living room, Ethan ran up with a wide grin. "Look what I made," he exclaimed, holding up a certificate from school. "It says I'm the best helper in class." Sophia beamed, pulling him into a hug. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart." Reed knelt down, examining the certificate with mock seriousness. "Helper of the Year? That's a big deal. I think we should celebrate." Ethan's eyes lit up. "Ice cream?" Sophia laughed. "Ice cream it is." The weeks turned into months, and the rhythm of Sophia and Ethan's new life began to settle into place. Their small apartment became a warm and inviting space, filled with laughter, colorful drawings taped to the walls, and the comforting scent of Sophia's home-cooked meals. Ethan's confidence grew with each passing day, and his bubbly personality blossomed at school. Officer Reed continued to be a fixture in their lives. What started as occasional check-ins evolved into regular visits. He often brought books for Ethan or small, thoughtful gifts, a box of crayons, a puzzle, or snacks for movie night. Though he always framed these visits as casual, it was clear he was invested in their well-being. One Saturday, Reed arrived with a surprise in tow, a shiny red bicycle for Ethan. "You've been doing so well in school, I thought you might like a little reward," Reed said, kneeling to meet Ethan's wide-eyed gaze. "For me?" Ethan exclaimed, running his hands over the bike's gleaming frame. "All yours, buddy," Reed replied with a smile. "But there's one condition. You've got to promise to always wear your helmet." Ethan grinned and nodded enthusiastically. "I promise." That afternoon, Reed spent hours in the nearby park teaching Ethan how to ride. With every wobble and near fall, Reed was there, steadying the bike and offering encouragement. By the end of the day, Ethan was riding on his own, his laughter echoing through the park as Sophia watched from a nearby bench, her heart full. One quiet evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, Sophia and Reed sat together on the couch, sipping tea. The soft glow of the table lamp cast warm shadows around the room. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence comfortable and companionable. Finally, Sophia broke the quiet. "I don't know what we would have done without you, Samuel. You've been there for us in ways I can't even begin to thank you for." Reed set his mug down and leaned forward slightly. "You don't have to thank me, Sophia. I'm just doing what anyone should do." Sophia shook her head, her gaze steady. "Not everyone would. You've gone above and beyond. You've been a rock for Ethan and for me." Reed hesitated, his expression thoughtful. "I care about you both. A lot. I don't know what the future holds, but I want to be a part of it if you'll let me." Sophia's heart skipped a beat at his words. She reached out, placing a hand over his. "You already are." Ethan's birthday arrived on a crisp spring day, marking his 6th year with laughter and joy. The small living room was transformed with balloons and streamers, and a homemade cake sat on the table, proudly decorated by Sophia and Ethan himself. Reed arrived carrying a large, carefully wrapped present. Ethan's eyes lit up as he tore into the paper, revealing a Lego set he had been eyeing for months. "This is the best birthday ever," he declared, throwing his arms around Reed. As the day wore on, the three of them laughed, played games, and built the Lego set together, their bond feeling more like a family with each passing moment. Over time, Reed's role in their lives evolved from supportive friend to something more profound. He became a constant presence, someone Ethan looked up to and Sophia leaned on. Their relationship deepened, rooted in trust, respect, and shared experiences. One sunny afternoon, as the three of them picnicked in the park, Reed turned to Sophia with a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking," he began, his tone careful yet hopeful. "I'd like to make this official, to be there for both of you, not just as a friend, but as family." Sophia's eyes filled with tears, and Ethan looked up from his sandwich, his face lighting up with excitement. "Does that mean you'll be my dad?" he asked. Reed smiled, his voice thick with emotion. "If that's okay with you, buddy." Ethan leaped into Reed's arms, his joyful hug answering the question better than words ever could. Sophia joined them, wrapping her arms around them both as the three of them held on tightly, their future as a family beginning to take shape under the warm afternoon sun. In the years that followed, the bond between Sophia, Ethan, and Reed only grew stronger. Together they faced challenges, celebrated milestones, and built a life filled with love and resilience. Reed adopted Ethan officially, becoming the father he had always needed, and through it all, Sophia's memory of her darkest days became a testament to her strength and determination to build a brighter future. Their story wasn't one of perfection, but one of hope, courage, and the healing power of unconditional love. The world around Jamal seemed to blur and fade. The shouts of his friends, the rhythmic creaking of the swings, and the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze all became distant echoes as his eyes locked on the photo in his hands. His mother's face smiled back at him from the worn picture, a smile so vivid it seemed to shine through time and space. Memories poured into his mind in a rush. The scent of her coconut lotion, the soft melody of her humming as she cooked, and the warmth of her arms wrapped tightly around him in a hug. His small fingers carefully traced the edges of the photograph, handling it as though it were the most delicate treasure in the world. How did this get here? He wondered. Who could have dropped it? The photograph looked old, but well-preserved, its edges slightly frayed as if it had been carried in someone's wallet for years. It was familiar yet foreign, comforting yet strange. As Jamal straightened up, still clutching the photo close to his chest, a shadow fell across the ground in front of him. The sudden darkness made him glance upward, and there he saw a man he vaguely recognized. The stranger's clothes were tattered, his face lined with age and hardship. But his eyes, intense and searching, were what truly caught Jamal's attention. They were fixed on the photograph in Jamal's hands, wide with recognition and brimming with an emotion Jamal couldn't quite place. "That's your mama," the man said softly, his voice rough but gentle. "That's my Tiana." Jamal's fingers tightened instinctively around the photo as a sense of unease prickled at the back of his neck. He took a small step backward, but the man mirrored his movement, closing the distance between them. "I'm Leon," the man continued, running a trembling hand through his unkempt hair. "I'm your father, Jamal. You were very little when they took you away. You remember me, don't you?" The words struck Jamal like a punch to the stomach. His mind raced. Daniel had never mentioned his real father, and the faint memories Jamal had from before were dark and frightening. I don't know you," Jamal stammered, his voice barely audible. "You probably don't remember much," Leon said, his gaze unwavering. "But I do. I remember everything. How your mama used to sing you to sleep with that lullaby about the moon and stars. How you wouldn't eat your peas unless she made those silly faces you loved." Each word stirred something deep within Jamal, dredging up faint, fragmented memories he had buried long ago. The details felt true, like echoes of a past he could barely grasp. Yet, the warnings Daniel had taught him rang loudly in his mind. Stay calm. Trust your instincts. Across the playground, a woman in a blue sundress pretended to tie her daughter's shoelaces while keeping her eyes trained on Jamal and the man. Maria Rodriguez, a frequent visitor to the park, immediately sensed that something was wrong. She noticed how Jamal's body was stiff with tension and how he kept subtly trying to step away from the man. The stranger, on the other hand, seemed overly eager, leaning toward the boy with an intensity that set Maria's nerves on edge. Maria straightened up and subtly reached for her phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she dialed 911. As she walked closer, she called out, her voice calm but firm. "Is everything okay here?" The man's head snapped up. His grip on Jamal's arm loosened slightly, but he didn't let go. His face shifted into a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Everything's fine," Leon said smoothly. "Just catching up with my boy. We were just about to head home." Maria's sharp gaze moved between Jamal and the man. She caught the pleading look in the boy's eyes, and her heart clenched. Holding her phone tightly, she raised it slightly to show the man she wasn't afraid to escalate the situation. "Is that right?" Maria asked, her tone laced with skepticism. "Jamal, honey, do you know this man?" Before Jamal could answer, Leon tightened his grip just enough to make the boy flinch. "We're fine, ma'am," Leon said, his voice firmer now. "We need to get going." Maria's stomach churned. She pressed the call button, whispering into the phone as she maintained eye contact with the man. The call connected to the precinct, where Daniel Carter was reviewing a stack of case files. The late shift was quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional buzz of a phone. When Daniel's line rang, he grabbed it instinctively, balancing the receiver between his ear and shoulder. "This is Detective Carter," he said briskly. "Detective, my name is Maria Rodriguez," came the urgent voice on the other end. "I'm at Riverside Park and I think something's wrong. There's a man here with a boy who looks very uncomfortable. He's holding a photograph of a woman. He said her name was Tiana Daniels. Blood ran cold, his hand trembling slightly as he set down the file he had been reviewing. "Describe the boy," he said, his voice tight. Maria did, and as she spoke, Daniel's worst fears crystallized. "That's Jamal," he murmured, his throat dry. Maria's voice cracked. "I should have done more. You did the right thing calling," Daniel assured her, though his own heart was pounding. "When did you see them? Which direction were they heading?" Maria provided as many details as she could, and Daniel was already on his feet, signaling to his fellow officers. "Jamal may have been abducted," he said sharply. "Dispatch all available units to the area around Riverside Park. We need eyes everywhere." Daniel grabbed his car keys and bolted out the door. As officers scrambled to respond, Daniel's mind raced. He tried calling Jamal's phone, but the line went straight to voicemail. He clenched his jaw. His radio crackled to life. "Detective Carter," said Officer Kevin Martinez, "we've got security footage from a nearby store. It shows the suspect and the boy heading east toward Main Street. The trail goes cold after that." Daniel gripped the steering wheel as he sped toward the area. "Keep looking. He's on foot. He can't have gotten far." "Detective," Martinez said hesitantly, "if he's trying to lay low, he might head for the old industrial district. Plenty of places to hide there." Daniel nodded, his resolve hardening. "I'm on it." The old industrial district loomed in the distance, a maze of abandoned warehouses and rusted machinery. The streetlights in this part of town flickered weakly, casting uneven pools of light over cracked pavement. Daniel's patrol car sped through the empty streets, his mind racing as he scanned every shadow for a sign of Jamal. His radio crackled again. "Detective Carter," came a voice. "Mr. Chen at the corner store on Mason Street said he saw a man matching the description with a young boy heading toward the old Phillips warehouse about an hour ago." Daniel gripped the wheel tighter, his knuckles white. "Copy that," he replied, his tone clipped. "I'm en route." The Phillips warehouse was a sprawling, decrepit structure at the edge of the district. Daniel killed the sirens as he pulled into the overgrown lot, his headlights illuminating the broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. He stepped out of the car, his flashlight cutting through the darkness as he approached the entrance. "Leon," Daniel's voice echoed through the cavernous building as he entered. "I know you're in here. Let Jamal go, and we'll handle this the right way." Inside, the air was heavy with dust and decay. Jamal sat on a threadbare cot near the back of the warehouse, his small frame trembling as Leon paced in front of him. "We can start over," Leon muttered, his voice wavering. "Just you and me. No one else getting in the way. We'll be a family again, Jamal." I promise. Jamal's eyes darted toward the table where Leon had left the phone. His heart raced as he tried to calculate how much time he had before Daniel arrived. "Can you tell me more about when I was little?" Jamal asked cautiously, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped him. Leon stopped pacing and turned toward the boy, his expression softening. "You were my whole world," he said, sitting down beside Jamal. "I remember how you used to laugh when I made silly faces, and how you couldn't sleep without that elephant." Leon reached into his tattered backpack and pulled out the stuffed elephant, its fur matted and one ear missing. "I kept it," he said, his voice breaking. "I thought maybe someday—" Jamal forced a small smile. "Thanks," he whispered, taking the toy. Leon's exhaustion began to show as his words slurred and his eyelids drooped. Soon, soft snores filled the warehouse. Jamal moved carefully, sliding off the cot and inching toward the phone. He picked it up, his hands trembling, and dialed the number he knew by heart. "Daddy," he whispered when Daniel answered. "I'm at the Phillips warehouse. Please come." Before he could say more, the phone slipped from his hands and hit the floor with a loud clatter. Leon stirred, his eyes snapping open. He looked at the phone, then at Jamal, and his face twisted with rage. "You called him?" Leon bellowed, lunging toward Jamal. Outside, Daniel heard the faint sound of Jamal's cry through the warehouse walls. Adrenaline surged through him as he pushed past the officers forming a perimeter. "Stand down," one of them called, but Daniel ignored the warning. He couldn't wait for backup. Kevin Martinez followed close behind him, his weapon drawn as they entered the dark building. "Leon!" Daniel shouted, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "Let him go!" Leon had Jamal in his grip, holding the boy in front of him like a shield. "Stay back!" he screamed, his eyes wild. "He's my son! You can't take him from me!" Daniel took a step closer, his hands raised in a calming gesture. "Leon, I know you care about Jamal. I know you're trying to do the right thing, but this isn't the way." Leon's grip on Jamal tightened. "What do you know about it?" he spat. "You stole him from me. You took everything from me." Daniel's voice softened. "Think about Jamal. Look at him. He's scared. You don't want this to be how he remembers you." For a moment, Leon's face crumpled with emotion. His grip loosened just enough for Jamal to pull free. In that instant, Kevin lunged forward, tackling Leon to the ground. Daniel rushed to Jamal, scooping him up and holding him tightly. The boy sobbed into his shoulder as Daniel whispered, "It's okay, buddy. I've got you. You're safe now." The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows of their home, casting a warm glow over the living room. Jamal sat curled up on the couch, the stuffed elephant clutched tightly in his hands. Daniel sat beside him, his arm draped protectively around the boy. "How are you feeling?" he asked gently. Jamal looked up at him, his eyes filled with uncertainty. Why did he do it? Daniel took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes people make bad choices because they don't know how to handle their feelings. But none of this was your fault, Jamal. You did everything right." Jamal nodded slowly, his small hands fiddling with the elephant's worn ear. "I'm glad you came for me." Daniel pulled him closer, his voice firm. "I'll always come for you, no matter what." In the days following the rescue, Jamal began to settle back into his routine. Though the shadow of the warehouse incident lingered, Daniel worked tirelessly to rebuild the boy's sense of security. Morning pancakes became a ritual, their shared time punctuated with jokes and stories meant to ease Jamal's worries. One day, as they sat at the kitchen table, Jamal carefully spread syrup on his pancakes. "Do you think he really loved me?" he asked softly, breaking the silence. Daniel set his fork down, his expression serious but gentle. "I think he wanted to, but he didn't know how. Love means putting someone else first, and Leon didn't make the choices to keep you safe." Jamal nodded, his small shoulders relaxing slightly. "I'm glad I have you," he said after a moment, his voice barely above a whisper. Daniel smiled and ruffled the boy's hair. "And I'm the luckiest guy in the world to have you." A week later, Daniel decided it was time for them to visit Tiana's grave together. The trip was as much for Jamal as it was for him, a chance to process everything that had happened and honor her memory. They walked through the quiet cemetery, the morning air cool and crisp. Jamal held a bouquet of daisies in one hand and the stuffed elephant in the other. When they reached Tiana's gravestone, Jamal knelt down, placing the flowers gently at its base. "Hi, Mom," he said softly, his voice steady despite the tears brimming in his eyes. "I met my other dad. He wasn't like I thought he'd be, but I'm okay now. I hope you're proud of me." Daniel stood behind him, his hands resting on Jamal's small shoulders. "She's always proud of you, buddy," he said, "and so am I." Jamal looked up at him. "Do you think she knows? About us? About how we're doing?" "I think she does," Daniel said with a smile. "And I think she's happy knowing we're taking care of each other." They stayed for a while, sharing stories about Tiana and reflecting on her life. For Jamal, it was a chance to connect with his mother's memory in a way he hadn't before. For Daniel, it was a reminder of the promise he had made to her and how far they had come. As the months passed, the scars left by Leon's actions began to fade. Jamal threw himself into school and hobbies, his curiosity and creativity shining through in everything he did. Daniel, meanwhile, found himself growing not only as a father, but as a person, learning to balance the responsibilities of parenting with the challenges of his job. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jamal turned to Daniel with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think Mom would have liked the way our life is now?" he asked. Daniel looked at him, his heart swelling with pride and love. "I think she would have loved it, and I think she'd love the amazing person you're growing up to be." Jamal grinned, leaning against Daniel's side as the colors of the setting sun painted the sky. Months after the warehouse incident, Daniel and Jamal revisited Tiana's belongings, carefully stored away in a box in the attic. As they sifted through photos and letters, they discovered something unexpected. A series of diary entries written by Tiana, filled with mentions of her twin sister, Selena. "Mom had a sister?" Jamal asked, his eyes wide with surprise. Daniel nodded, his own curiosity piqued. "It looks like they were separated when they were young. She always hoped to find her again." They spent hours poring over the diary, piecing together clues about Selena's life. Finally, Daniel came across an address scribbled in the margins of one entry. "Riverside," he said aloud, his heart skipping a beat. "She might still be living there." "Can we find her?" Jamal asked eagerly, hope lighting up his face. Daniel smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "We can try." The drive to Riverside was filled with quiet anticipation. Jamal clutched the diary tightly in his lap, his small fingers tracing its worn edges. When they arrived at the modest house, Daniel took a deep breath before knocking on the door. When it opened, they were greeted by a woman who could have been Tiana's mirror image. Selena Parker stared at them in stunned silence, her eyes brimming with unspoken emotions. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jamal stepped forward, holding out the diary. "This was my mom's," he said. "She wrote about you. She was my mom, but I think you're my aunt." Selena's face softened, tears spilling down her cheeks as she took the diary. "Tiana," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please come in." The playground buzzed with life, but for Jamal, the world had fallen eerily silent. The shouts of his friends, the rhythmic squeak of the swings, and even the rustling of the wind through the trees faded into the background. His attention was locked on a single photograph resting in his small hands. It was his mother, Tiana, captured in a moment of pure joy. Her face glowed with laughter, her eyes crinkling at the corners in the way only they did when she was truly happy. The image was both comforting and haunting. Memories came rushing in, unbidden and overwhelming. He could almost smell the faint coconut scent of her lotion and hear the melody of her humming as she stirred a pot of stew on the stove. His heart ached with a longing he couldn't put into words. Jamal's fingers carefully traced the edges of the photograph, as if touching something sacred. The paper felt worn but sturdy, like it had been handled often and with care. Questions buzzed in his mind. How did this photo get here? Who could have dropped it? As he turned the photo over, hoping for answers, a shadow suddenly fell over him, blocking the sunlight. Jamal glanced up sharply, his small body tensing. Standing before him was a man he had only seen in fleeting, foggy memories. His clothes were dirty and tattered, his face weathered by time and hardship. His unkempt hair and scruffy beard gave him a rugged, almost desperate appearance. But it was the man's eyes that froze Jamal in place. They were fixed on the photograph with a mix of longing and recognition that sent a chill down Jamal's spine. "That's your mama," the man said, his voice rough but tinged with something softer. "That's my Tiana." Jamal clutched the photo to his chest, instinctively taking a small step back. The man's presence felt heavy, pressing in on him. "I'm Leon," the man continued, running a trembling hand through his hair. "I'm your father, Jamal. You don't remember me, do you?" Jamal shook his head slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. The few memories he had of his biological father were fragmented and filled with fear. Leon took a step closer, his eyes never leaving Jamal's face. "You were so little when they took you away. You probably don't remember much, but I do. I remember everything." Jamal stayed silent, his grip on the photo tightening. He wanted to run, but his legs felt rooted to the ground. Leon continued, his voice cracking as he spoke. Your mama used to sing you to sleep with that lullaby about the moon and stars, and you wouldn't eat your peas unless she made those silly faces you loved. The words struck something deep within Jamal. The details felt real, like whispers from a past he had nearly forgotten, but his instincts, honed by Daniel's guidance, told him to be cautious. Across the playground, Maria Rodriguez noticed the interaction. She had been helping her daughter tie her shoe when she saw Jamal's tense posture and the way he kept subtly trying to step away from the man. Her mother's intuition kicked in immediately. Maria straightened and pretended to check her phone, all the while keeping her eyes on the pair. Something about the man's body language set off alarm bells. He leaned in too close, his movements too erratic. She watched as Jamal took another step back, clutching the photograph tightly. Maria's stomach churned. She slipped her phone from her pocket and dialed 911, her fingers shaking slightly. Riverside Park, she whispered into the phone, glancing around to ensure she wasn't overheard. There's a boy here who looks like he's in trouble. He's with a man who's acting suspiciously. I think the boy's name is Jamal. Maria moved closer, her voice calm but firm. Is everything okay here? Leon straightened, his hand on Jamal's shoulder tightening just enough to make the boy flinch. He forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Everything's fine, Leon said quickly. Just catching up with my boy. We were just about to head home. Maria's gaze shifted to Jamal, who looked at her with wide, pleading eyes. She felt a pang of anger and worry. Are you sure? Maria asked, her tone skeptical. Jamal, is this man your dad? Leon's jaw tightened. Look, ma'am, I don't know who you are, but we're fine. Mind your business. Maria ignored him, her thumb pressing the send button on her phone. Yes, I'm at Riverside Park, she said softly into the receiver. There's a boy who looks distressed. Please send someone quickly. At the precinct, Daniel Carter sat at his desk, the late shift unusually quiet. He rubbed his temples, trying to focus on the stack of paperwork in front of him. The sudden ring of his phone jolted him from his thoughts. He picked it up, his tone brisk. Detective Carter. Detective, came Maria's urgent voice. My name is Maria Rodriguez. I'm at Riverside Park, and I think something's wrong. There's a man here with a boy who looks distressed. He called the boy Jamal, and he's holding a photograph of a woman named Tiana. Daniel froze, his breath catching in his throat. Describe the boy, he said, his voice tight. Maria's description confirmed it. Jamal was with the man. I should have done more, Maria said, her voice cracking. You did the right thing calling, Daniel assured her, his heart pounding. Do you know where they went? They were heading east, Maria said. But you need to hurry. Daniel was already on his feet, signaling to his team. We've got a possible abduction, he barked. All units, converge on Riverside Park and surrounding areas. Move now. Daniel's patrol car roared to life as he sped toward Riverside Park, his heart pounding like a drum. He couldn't shake the image of Jamal, alone, scared, and in danger. Every second felt like an eternity as his mind raced with possibilities. His radio crackled to life. Detective Carter, this is Officer Martinez. We've reviewed security footage from a store near the park. The suspect and the boy were heading east, but the trail ends at Main Street. Daniel tightened his grip on the wheel. He's not going to stick to open areas. He knows we're looking for him. Any leads on where he might be hiding? There was a pause before Martinez replied. If he's trying to stay off the radar, he might head toward the industrial district. Lots of abandoned warehouses and alleys to duck into. Daniel's jaw clenched. Dispatch units to sweep the area. I'm heading there now. The industrial district was a desolate expanse of crumbling buildings and overgrown lots. Streetlights flickered weakly, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. Daniel's car screeched to a halt near the entrance to an old warehouse. The structure was massive, its broken windows staring out like hollow eyes. Faint graffiti covered its walls, and the air smelled of rust and decay. Daniel grabbed his flashlight and weapon, his breath steady but his heart racing. "Leon!" Daniel shouted as he stepped inside, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "I know you're in here. Let Jamal go, and we can end this peacefully." Inside the warehouse, Jamal sat on a stained mattress, his small body trembling. Leon paced back and forth, his movements erratic. His wild eyes darted between the boy and the faint sounds of sirens in the distance. "We can start fresh," Leon muttered half to himself. "No one to judge us. No one to tell us what we can't be." Jamal watched him carefully, his instincts on high alert. He clutched the stuffed elephant Leon had given him earlier, his mind racing for a way out. "Can you tell me more about when I was little?" Jamal asked softly, keeping his voice steady. Leon paused, his expression softening. "You were my whole world," he said, sitting beside Jamal. "I remember the way you'd hold this little guy every night. You wouldn't sleep without him." Leon's voice cracked, and for a moment, genuine sadness crossed his face. But the moment was fleeting. His desperation returned as he grabbed a backpack and began rummaging through it. Jamal's eyes flicked to the table nearby, where Leon had left his phone. The boy's heart pounded as he calculated the distance. "Were you happy with us?" Jamal asked, inching slightly closer to the table. Leon's back was turned as he muttered, "We were happy. Until—" His voice trailed off, and his grip on the backpack tightened. Seizing the moment, Jamal darted to the table and grabbed the phone. His small fingers fumbled as he quickly dialed Daniel's number. "Hello?" Daniel's voice was tense, filled with both hope and fear. "Daddy," Jamal whispered, his voice trembling. "I'm at the Phillips warehouse. Please come." Before Jamal could finish, Leon spun around, his face contorted with fury. The phone slipped from Jamal's hands, clattering to the floor. "You called him?" Leon bellowed, his voice booming in the empty warehouse. He lunged toward Jamal, grabbing the boy's arm with a force that made him cry out. The sound of sirens grew louder, their wailing echoing through the night. Leon froze for a moment, panic flashing across his face. Outside, Daniel and Officer Martinez arrived at the warehouse. The building loomed before them, its dark windows hiding whatever lay inside. Daniel didn't wait for backup. "Stand down, detective," another officer called, but Daniel pushed forward, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. Inside, Leon stood in the center of the room, holding Jamal tightly in front of him like a shield. "Stay back," Leon shouted, his voice cracking. "He's my son. You don't get to take him from me again." Daniel raised his hands in a calming gesture, his flashlight illuminating Leon's face. "Leon, listen to me," Daniel said, his tone firm but calm. "You don't want to hurt him. He's scared. Look at him." Leon's grip on Jamal tightened, but his expression wavered. "You love him, don't you?" Daniel continued, taking a cautious step forward. "If you let him go, he'll remember you as someone who cared about him. But if you keep this up, you'll lose him forever." Leon's eyes darted between Daniel and Jamal. His breathing grew ragged and his arms slackened slightly. It was the opening Martinez needed. The officer moved swiftly, tackling Leon to the ground and wresting Jamal free. Daniel rushed forward, pulling Jamal into his arms. The boy sobbed against his chest, his small body shaking. "You're safe now," Daniel whispered, his voice breaking. "I've got you." The ride home was quiet. Jamal sat in the back seat, clutching the stuffed elephant as though it were a lifeline. Daniel glanced at him in the rearview mirror, his heart heavy with both relief and guilt. When they got home, Daniel helped Jamal into his pajamas and tucked him into bed. The boy didn't ask for a bedtime story. Instead, he reached out, his small hand gripping Daniel's. "Do you think he really loved me?" Jamal asked softly. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, his voice steady. "I think he wanted to love you, but he didn't know how to do it the right way. Love means keeping someone safe, and he couldn't do that." Jamal nodded, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. "I'm glad you're my dad," he murmured before drifting off to sleep. Daniel stayed by his side long into the night, watching the steady rise and fall of his son's chest. The next few weeks were a delicate balancing act for Daniel and Jamal. Though Jamal had resumed his usual routines, school, drawing, and playing with his friends, there were moments when his cheerful demeanor faltered. Daniel could see the weight of everything that had happened in the boy's quiet moments. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch, Jamal turned to Daniel, his dark eyes serious. "Do you think I'll ever see him again?" Daniel set his coffee cup down and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "That's not going to happen," he said firmly. "The police are making sure of it." Jamal nodded, but the uncertainty lingered in his expression. "I just don't understand why he came back." Daniel hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes people hold on to the past because they don't know how to move forward, but you don't need to worry about that. I'm here and you're safe." Jamal seemed to accept this, leaning into Daniel's side as they sat in the fading sunlight. One evening, Daniel decided it was time to share something special with Jamal. He retrieved a box from the attic, dusty and sealed shut with tape that hadn't been touched in years. "What's in there?" Jamal asked curiously as Daniel set the box on the living room floor. "Memories," Daniel said, smiling faintly. "Things your mom kept safe." They opened the box together, pulling out old photographs, letters, and a small diary with Tiana, written in elegant script on the cover. Jamal's eyes widened as he flipped through the diary's pages, the words bringing his mother's thoughts and dreams to life. "She wrote a lot about you," Daniel said, pointing to an entry dated just after Jamal's birth. "Look here. Jamal has his father's eyes, but he's already got my stubborn streak. He's going to be something special, I just know it." Jamal giggled. "Was I really stubborn?" Daniel laughed. "You still are, kid." As they continued exploring the box, they found a photograph of two young girls identical in every way. Jamal tilted his head. "Is this Mom?" Daniel frowned, examining the photo more closely. "I think so. But it looks like there are two of her." "Twins?" Jamal asked, his curiosity piqued. Daniel nodded slowly, flipping the photo over. On the back was a note in Tiana's handwriting. "Tiana and Selena, age 10. Summer memories." The revelation sent Daniel and Jamal on a new journey. Using the clues in Tiana's diary, they pieced together fragments of her past, eventually leading them to an address for Selena, her twin sister. The drive to Riverside was filled with anticipation. Jamal clutched the diary tightly, his small fingers tracing its worn edges as he imagined meeting someone who was connected to his mother in such a unique way. When they arrived at the house, Daniel took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. The door creaked open, revealing a woman who looked so much like Tiana that Daniel's breath caught in his chest. Selena stared at them, her eyes wide with shock. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jamal stepped forward, holding out the diary. "This was my mom's," he said softly. "She was my mom, but I think you're my aunt." Selena's face crumpled as she took the diary from Jamal, her hands shaking. "Tiana," she whispered, her voice breaking. She stepped aside, gesturing for them to come in. Selena's home quickly became a sanctuary for Daniel and Jamal. Over the days they spent with her, she shared stories of her and Tiana's childhood, how they had been inseparable until their parents' divorce separated them. "She was my other half," Selena said one evening, tears glistening in her eyes. "Even after we lost touch, I never stopped thinking about her." Jamal listened intently, hanging on to every word. For him, these stories were like pieces of a puzzle, filling in the gaps about the mother he missed so much. "She used to sing to me," Jamal said one evening, a wistful smile on his face. "She said it was our special song." Selena's expression softened. "She sang that song to me too, about the moon and stars." The bond between Jamal and Selena grew quickly. They planted flowers together in her garden, baked cookies in her cozy kitchen, and even painted a mural in her backyard, a vibrant tribute to Tiana's memory. Daniel watched the transformation with quiet gratitude. For the first time in months, he saw Jamal laugh without hesitation, his joy unburdened by the weight of the past. Over time, Selena became an integral part of their lives. Her home, once quiet and lonely, was filled with laughter and new memories. She shared stories about Tiana, filling in the gaps of her life that Daniel and Jamal had never known. For Daniel, reconnecting with Selena felt like finding another piece of Tiana. For Jamal, it was a chance to see his mother through a new lens, to discover the depth of her love and the strength of the family she had always wanted to build. As they sat together on Selena's porch one evening, the stars twinkling above, Daniel glanced at Jamal and Selena and felt an overwhelming sense of peace. "We've come a long way," he said softly. "And we still have so much to look forward to," Selena replied, smiling. Together, they faced the future as a family, one built on love, resilience, and the promise of brighter days ahead.